take just a minute to sort of tell everybody who you are, what you do, and sort of, and then we'll just start talking.
Well, who am I? What do I do? That's a question. I am a 43-year-old father of four. Got married at 25, met my wife when I was 20. She was 18. She was the only woman I had ever dated in my entire life. Um, Thought things were going fine. Career was growing, family was growing. Turns out we had disconnected at some point in time in between, probably even before saying I do. And when she said she was out, um, she started looking elsewhere for what she wasn't getting with me. And because I had a whole lot of really bad programming from long before, I reacted the way a lot of men do: is you get a lot of distrust and anxiety, insecurity, all of those monsters that we try and help men get over and get past now.
Yeah.
I felt every single one of them every single day, and was stuck in that loop for a really long time, uh, and didn't really even realize it. And I think that's the weird part. Like you think by managing the situation, by trying to stay on top of everything, you're doing something right because it's probably how you handle things professionally.
Right.
But you couldn't be more wrong, right? But I didn't have the tools, and I hadn't run into anybody who got through to me how to handle things differently.
Yeah.
So, um,
And so how long was that? How long ago was that?
which part? I uh, I found the program about a month after finding out that she was back on all of the apps that she had been cheating through.
Mm,
So that would have been November of 22.
hmm.
Um, and I happened to trip over the program through like Facebook ads. I really didn't even know what I was looking at. I just, this guy was yelling at me, and I figured he actually made some sense. And
Right.
it was almost like I've told him before. I told Cass before. It's almost like having an older brother flicking you in the middle of the forehead, telling you exactly what you're doing wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So, and that's how it got through to me. And that's been my approach with the guys that come through the program too. I'm sure you've noticed I've got a bit of a reputation with how I approach things.
Oh yeah. Very.
Um, I, yeah, I get very direct. I don't try and obviously I'm capable of tempering my words,
That's right.
but often I don't want to filter them either. You know what I mean?
Right.
That's a tightrope to walk. So you try and read the man you're working with and see what he can actually handle.
That's right.
This past weekend's call, we had a really good example of that, where I was on both sides of the spectrum, depending
Mm,
on which situation we were dealing with. But
that's wow.
most men need to hear it from a guy who's willing to confront them.
Right. Absolutely. And in a way that's going to push them into change, into a new reality. I know that's, for what it's worth. I mean, I think, thank goodness we haven't had infidelity, but we've definitely have, in my marriage, I've been married 28 years, and I love my wife to death. She loves me, but we've had those same seasons where it's like, who are you and why am I here? you know, and for me, it was always, I knew what to do. I got it. Everything's good until I didn't. And then I look in the mirror and I'm going, not only do I not have it under control, it's on fire, it's in a dumpster, and it's going over a canyon full of alligators at the bottom. It's over.
Yeah,
And it's
yeah,
you have to confront the reality of what is your fault. And I think that's one of the things that I've counseled people. I counseled almost full time for almost 15 years. Relationship counseling, pastoral counseling. Not a licensed therapist, but a certified counselor. There's a big difference, and more of a coach than anything, but giving direction in certain myopic circles. But it's funny, all the stuff that you say to everybody else about, here's what you can control, here's what you can't control, here's what you can have power over, here's what you're powerless over, and then boom, it hits you in the face, and you don't even know what you're talking about. You know the words, but you don't know what you're doing. And and I just speak from the circle and the space of where a majority of my work lives is in the Christian culture. And that's a fiery hot word, and I don't want to get into that tonight. But I am completely not. I am so different and what that means for me and my family. Yet we were still just the same. And what I've found over the last 2 years with meeting men like you and others who have found transformation and honestly found identity and found freedom is you said it. You said we have some programming that we didn't know about. Talk about that. What was some of that programming? If you want to share, you can always say, "No, I'm not going to talk about that."
No, I'm fine. I'm fine talking about that. Look, I fell into most of the same traps that most men um, are familiar with, way too familiar with. I provided, I protected, and in exchange for that, I should have a level of security in my household, as
Yeah.
far as my family remaining together and my family not being threatened by outside influences that could be, from an affair or something like that. Certainly could never possibly get divorced if you're checking those boxes. I mean, you're a good guy,
Right.
you know. I mean, how could that possibly happen? That kind of thing doesn't happen in those families. And if it does, it must be somebody else's fault because it's certainly not mine because I'm doing everything right. Um, right? You get back to your fault. I very much followed the model I was shown by my parents. My parents are married 45 years this year.
Mhm.
My dad's 84, my mom's 82. They both live with me now because my dad's got a lot of physical limitations. My mom's got Alzheimer's and dementia. So, you know, but my dad went to work every day. My mom stayed home with me and my sister, and they're married to this day. Now, the idea that they have any adventure in life, I think would be a foreign concept that neither one of them would even know what you were talking about if you dared bring it up from the generation they were from, because they did what they were supposed to do too.
Right.
Um, my wife, on the other hand, was from a very different dynamic. And it's something I wasn't very aware of at 25 years old. I was, young and in love and was following my parents' example, and it was going to work out great.
Right.
My wife's parents are both divorced twice. She's got an older sister divorced twice. She's got another sister divorced twice. Um, Divorce is the natural end to marriage in her family, not death. And those issues have gotten worse since we got married. But I just kind of always had a feeling that we were different.
Yeah.
And I think you get into programming and falling back on things you were conditioned to believe are true without really keeping your finger on the pulse of what's actually going on in an active way.
Right.
I fell into all those traps, I mean, and that's just it. So these problems were brewing beneath the surface and I was kind of oblivious to them. Not to mention I was working 60, 70 hours a week and,
Right.
you know, not really present in the home and all that, those kinds of things too. So
Yeah, and like you've already said, you provided, structure, income, fun times together, house, whatever, party favors or excitement, and in your mind, and I can say that in mine as well, and in certain aspects of that in a different way, I can see, wow, there's nothing wrong. I mean, people used to say that to me and Robin all the time, my wife, and y'all's marriage is, and it is amazing. I mean, our friendship has been amazing, our marriage has been amazing, but it's also had some of those holes that neither one of us could really see. I mean, what do you say to a guy, Pete, um, who you meet on the street or you're talking or a friend, and he goes, "Man, I've just never had that experience. My marriage is perfect," but yet both of us stand here and say, mm, "We didn't see it coming." What do you say to a guy? What do we look for? What I mean, how can you give somebody a heads up for something that they can't see?
that is an excellent question. Give me a second on that.
That's all right. It just popped into my head. I thought I'm going to ask because I want the answer.
So much, so much. Well, number one, they need to be willing to hear an answer.
Mm,
That's number one. If they're not willing to hear an answer, it's not you can talk all day or you can say anything you want to them. They're not going to hear it, and they're certainly not going to hear it from the perspective that they need to understand it.
hmm.
Because whatever you say that might poke holes in that is going to be met with defensiveness,
Yeah.
just reflexively, and that's understandable. I mean, anybody who thinks their marriage is perfect, if you dare plant a seed or even allude to the idea it might not be, if they think it's perfect, they've got their marriage on a pedestal. You're talking about guys having their wives on a pedestal. They have their marriage on a pedestal,
Yeah.
right? So they will do what they need to do to defend that pedestal. And that's if you can even start to break through and start to examine, like we know from the work we're doing, what are they actually doing on themselves on a day to day, week to week, month to month, year to year basis? How are they growing to keep themselves the best version of themselves that they can possibly be,
Yeah.
to actually make that marriage the best possible marriage it could possibly be?
Right.
Because if their job is to lead it and they're not growing, they're not developing, they're not constantly getting 1% better than they were yesterday,
Yeah.
it's real easy to topple that over time.
Oh yeah. It's just it's very weak. It's a very weak straw man, just ready to burn up and fall over. That's crazy.
It's a surefire symptom of complacency.
Yeah. And I think that's where it
You know
catches.
how you know your marriage? And this is something I actually just thought of this. In the context we discuss things with Cass and with everybody else.
Mhm.
You know how you know your marriage isn't the best one it could possibly be? You know how you know?
How you know?
Because you're gonna make it better tomorrow.
Ah, so it wasn't the best.
Your marriage wasn't the best.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
You never stop working. Just
That's
like
right.
on you never stop working.
Yep. That's beautiful. Yeah, and it's tough. I mean, you see it. People say, "Well, I love my wife. I love my wife spiritually and physically. I love my wife. She's my everything." And it's funny you mentioned putting marriage on a pedestal. There was a time there where my wife would say, "I mean, why do you put this relationship before everything?" And I became just to give you I became very codependent on my wife emotionally when a lot of stuff professionally was falling apart, and she would say things like, you just need to do something else. You need to go find a hobby. You need to understand I can't be responsible for your emotions." And I'm thinking, well, I love you. You're everything. But that is so selfish. It's actually not love. And that's something that I learned. That's not love at all. That's just possession. It's like, okay, so this woman is amazing and this relationship I have is amazing. And what I had to learn is that it actually identified me. And when when the reality of what it really was, that it wasn't perfect, came to the forefront of my attention, then I was a failure. So then it was still about me again. So all that time she's going, "You're just not listening." Well, I am listening. I'm telling you, my life's a mess. I feel like crap. As a husband, I'm not doing my job, you see. And it was never about her, which is what love is. It was always about how she made me feel. And unless she was a part of the way it needed to be for me. And I mean, I'm telling you, and I don't know that you can. I mean, if you and I can figure out how to get out ahead of that, we'd probably be pretty rich guys because we could probably bottle it up and market it. I really think that men have to go to the bottom before they get to the place where they can begin to climb, you know? And so,
Yeah, and there's a couple things in there. Number one, for me, I was very much in the mode of men have like three emotions: happy, frustrated, and angry.
yeah,
And like there really nothing else exists. So like what and if I dare show any of those, what's wrong with me? Like there's clearly, I mean, something might be a little bit off with me if I'm showing more than just that, or possibly able to identify anything beyond that. Which basically makes it impossible to identify it in somebody else because you're that disconnected from it.
right.
And then, the concept that I know we've talked, I think you and I talked about the concept of male emotional color blindness.
Yeah, yeah,
The idea that men really don't even know what they're feeling because they have uh, such a deficient skill set when it comes to engaging with emotions.
yeah. I wasn't allowed to really feel. I mean, I came from a background where I had extreme support, parental support, grandparents. So I was one of the lucky kids who got to know their great grandparents, great aunts and uncles, and it was neat. But it also, I mean, it was a very stoic lifestyle. I mean, there was compassion there, according to the way Stoicism would, and support there. But there was always this posturing of alliteration comes too easy for me. I don't intend to do it, but there's a posturing of poshness. So forgive me because it just happens. Um, and so I've always had to present myself in such a way. And in the same way, I've postured my family roles in that same way. So my children have to look a certain way, my marriage has to look a certain way, and I'm not aware of it. That's been a hard thing. So emotions were always controlled, and they presented themselves as everybody's in self-control. I mean, it doesn't matter. I mean, like my grandfather, he's 88 years old. He was a steel worker, and I've seen him dirty because I've gone out to the shop and I've seen him on a job site. But when he got home every day, he went into the back door that he built into his home that walked into a mud room. And when he came down up the hallway from his bedroom to the main living quarters, he was dressed. He looked like a preacher. He was always clean because that's how you presented yourself. We've always had the formal living room. And so all of this has just, developed in my mind value. So if it wasn't like this, so when things begin to fall apart for me, I knew one emotion, and the only emotion that would get me attention was anger. And I like how our mutual friend Rob said a couple of weeks ago, anger is this is an exact quote, but this is what he said. Anger is or rage is the antidote to fear. And so what was really happening for me is I was fearful of not having that everything that made me who I was falling apart. It was coming undone.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've from my own perspective, I felt very much the same thing. I keep my so let me give a little more into my story here, and this is something I can talk about now openly, and I have no um, obviously there's certain negative feelings associated with it, but they're not like they were before. It's what happened, and it is what it is. But my wife and I started dating, and we were young. I was 20, like I said, she's the only girl I ever dated. She had a couple of boyfriends before me. She was 18. Um, we had a discussion early on when we first got together about the her history and my history and that kind of thing. And she said she had two prior people she had been with. Well, we date for several years. We get engaged. We get married. We have two kids. We got our third kid on the way, and we're having dinner one night while she's pregnant with our third. And the context of the discussion really isn't relevant, but it came up, and she said, "Well, no, it's four. I was with four people." And I look at her like, now, keep in mind, I also have a vivid memory. I don't know if you're familiar with hyperthermesia. It's where you basically don't forget things. So, I'm literally in my head playing the conversation about, her saying two when we were
Right.
just dating. And I look at her like, what are you talking about? Like when between the time we met and today did these other two people enter the equation? Because we've been together the entire time. She was like, well, no, I cheated on my boyfriend Kevin in high school, or my past boyfriend in high school. And I was like, oh, that's that's an issue I would have liked to have known about, and that messed with me for a long time because it kind of changed the image, this pedestal,
Yeah.
that most of us, had worked so hard to cultivate for our wives or girlfriends or significant others to be on it. It kind of shifted that entire perspective and really messed with me for a long time. And I know I didn't react well to it at all,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Um, So in 2016, my daughter and I and my wife had started a new educational program, and she was in school, and she was just starting. And my second daughter and I are sitting in the living room one day, and we see the car pull up, and she stays in the car on her phone, like we can see her laughing and joking. And my daughter's sitting next to me saying, "What's mom doing out there?" And I'm sitting there like, I know exactly what's going on here. Like, this is very clear what type of conversation is going on this phone with her face lit up in the driver's seat for 45 minutes. And my daughter is clueless. She's like five. I'm just telling her, she's probably talking to your aunt, is what it is. My daughter keeps going back to the window. I mean, that was brutal. She came in that night and I said, well, what's going on? Clearly something was going on here. She's, I get the whole, hand on the shoulder, kiss on the cheek, nothing's going on. The next morning I saw some messages on her phone and found out she was talking to someone.
Yeah.
I mean, so that shatters your worldview of what you think. And immediately, to your point, I go into damage control and hide it mode.
Right.
No one can know this is going on in my life because I've got this perfect family, this idyllic setting that I'm raising these at this time four children in. There's no way anything could be wrong here. So I've got to avoid disapproval like it's the plague.
Right.
Which of course spikes anxiety, makes it that much harder to actually repair and build connection.
Mm-hmm.
So that, then, we went on for a few more years. I thought things got better. I thought, and then um, when I found out in 2021 she had three simultaneous affairs going on, it was kind of an earth-shattering
Wow.
revelation, and not really any real remorse about it. It was just what she was doing.
Right. Now let me ask you a question. Whose fault were those things?
Mine,
Oh, who? All three of them?
mine.
Okay.
Well, I mean, I feel, and this is the thing. I can talk about this in a different context than I used to talk about it, right? Um, I actually, half jokingly say, well, I feel kind of bad for those two guys too, because she was cheating on them too. but, I mean, there's not like the anger and the embarrassment and things that I can just talk about it now. It's not even like it's an issue. Look, I fell very short in areas that I had full control over,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of, and you can't be in a position to assess what she was doing until you fully understand and have made the proper moves to grow yourself.
Right.
This is something men miss all too often. If you're stuck in this angry place where you can't even breathe and you're so insecure and everything is blame shifting, you can't even begin to address the other issues that might be there because you need to do that work anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And that work's got to be done first.
Yeah.
And then if it's really necessary at that point, most of the time, Cass will tell you, it's probably not even necessary at that point to do it. Because
Right.
no one else in the world is doing this kind of work. You know,
Yeah.
then maybe you're in a different place where you could sit down and say, look, I know where I messed up
Yeah.
here. And from a sincere place, I can forgive you for what happened on your end. I fell very short, and that was not you.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard for people to hear. I know in the counseling area, there's always the guilty party, the at fault, and the victim. And the one who cheats is always the victim. And we speak in the context of men, our responsibility, our makeup, and how we're supposed to be men, providing protection, for providing structure, providing safety, and what we want is safety, but what we end up doing is controlling everything. And the hardest thing for me to swallow was to realize that, every breath I took, every step that I walked in my life, I did with the intention of doing well for my family, by my family, that my wife would be lifted and built and supported. And I looked in the mirror and saw myself as this amazing, good, and nice man because I wasn't abusive and I was, and I wasn't even saying, hey, give me a cookie because I deserve. No, this is what it means. This is the minimum to be human. And I'm doing this stuff. But when I came to the realization that who I was, I hated, and the old guy, the old James, hurt my family more than anything else in this world ever has or could. And I didn't even know I was doing it.
And that yeah, that is so important the way you laid that out there, because I wasn't even at the point where I understood I had a version of myself to be that angry with or upset about or despised to that level until I really started doing work on myself, and then was like, oh, come on, how did I miss this?
Yeah.
I'm an executive for a corporation. I've got a master's degree. Like, how the hell did this get past me?
Right. You're a smart guy. You're a good guy.
I'm not stupid. Like, how did this all like zip right past me? Because I'm off trying to, you know, do everything I think I'm supposed to do. But there's this massive chunk of it. It's like an iceberg. I was taking care of the part above the water.
Right. There you go. Yeah. It's funny because we've mentioned, and I'm a high producer when I'm not sad or depressed, but for the most part, I'm working a lot. I'm always producing something, and it's just part of who I am. I enjoy it. My wife is also like that. She loves to build and create and do, and that's one of the things that really brought us together. We have incredible like-mindedness in that area. But there's a lot of times, people say, well, I'm not a workaholic. I'm home every day at 5:00. We go to ball games, we go to movies. I date my wife. Everything is so good, and I hear this, but then all of a sudden we get on these calls and we see these new guys come into the program that we're in, and it's like, yeah, what did I do wrong? I was doing everything right. No,
Right.
you weren't. So it's not
The
even
number of times, yeah.
Not even the
Yeah.
workaholics. It's the dataholics. It's the dateaholics. It's all of these types of men. It's, because I was always taught, just be there for your wife, bring her flowers every now and then, and that's good. We have to have that level, but it's the perception. It's the identity. It's the root. And you've mentioned nice guy a few times, and I know all well about that. I've been in Glover's book about 7 times over the last 2 years. Matter of fact, it destroyed me. It literally destroyed me. Talk about that for a minute. I mean, I know that's sort of one of the things that you coach men on. What can you say to a man who is a nice guy and knows it and is doing very well in his relationship, but he doesn't understand that
What do I,
that's not good?
what do I typically say? What do I typically say to them?
Yeah, I mean,
I
what do you?
usually call. I usually try, it's usually pretty clear where they have covert contracts, where they're avoiding disapproval, where they're just doing something to get approval.
Wow.
And I charge head first into forehead to forehead contact over it.
Yeah.
And
And
often they don't like that at first.
yeah, what is a covert contract?
Covert contracts where you have decided that you're going to do something, and while you don't get your wife's signature on the line or even tell her you're drawing it up, you expect her to do something in return. And it doesn't just go for your wife; it goes for everything in life.
Right.
I'm gonna take you out to dinner. That way, you won't cheat on me later.
Right.
Or I'm gonna take you out to dinner. That way, you'll be happy with me later, and maybe we'll get a little amorous after dinner.
Right. What
And,
about
and a lot of times it happens at such a subconscious level. You don't necessarily realize you're doing it because the programming runs so deep.
right.
It really takes some conscious effort to identify it in yourself. And you don't, and a lot of these guys don't realize they're doing it until you call out the feeling afterwards, where they feel so insecure or just so upset, or they can't quite pinpoint why they're upset after she decided they weren't going to follow through after dinner.
Right.
And then that's usually the opening to say, yeah, because you went to dinner that night thinking that if you took her to dinner, she would feel some sense of reciprocation or obligation to reciprocate
Right.
with something you wanted.
Right. Seems benign, seems innocent enough, right?
Totally. What could be wrong with dinner?
Nothing, not a thing.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I didn't really understand that stuff until it was on fire either. You just
Yeah.
don't know that you're
Oh,
doing it.
yeah.
You really don't.
No.
Yeah.
No, and see that's the thing too. That's one of the other things that men do sometimes get hung up on is this idea that their intentions matter.
Yeah.
Your intentions don't necessarily impact her feelings.
That's right. And what does love say? Does love say, well, I had the right intention, or does love say, wow, I hurt this person and I need to stop
Right.
what I've done? That's what love says. I say it all the time in my teaching that we have used the word love. We've used it so frivolously that it no longer has meaning, no longer has impact. I mean, I love Pete's coffee. I love pizza. I
Do
love my
you want to get me started on this? Do
no, no.
we need to break out? What is it? Is it 9 different words for love in ancient Greek? I mean, how do we want to break this down? I mean,
There's a lot of Greek nuance, but the thing is, there context is king. Even if the word
exactly. That's the point.
context is king. So you can love your wife because you say you feel fond toward her, but that is not love. That's a feeling. That's an emotion. Love is something concrete that provides structure. Love is something that does at the cost of the lover without complaint.
Love, love to piggyback onto the verse that tells us God is love. It's a specific type of love where you selflessly will the good of the other.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as a husband and a father, your job is to selflessly will the good of your wife and family
Yeah.
for
When,
its own sake in
when's,
action.
when's it our turn? That's what some people say. When do I get my turn? I think we've had our turn I've had my turn for 48 years. I'm 2 years into this new man. And, 48 years before that, he had his turn. And now it's
Yeah, and it,
turn.
and if and this is I know we're not getting deep into Christianity today, but if what greater aspiration could there be than to love others as God loves you?
Right. That's right. And no matter what you do, I said this past Sunday, I said, at the lowest point of my life, when I was having panic attacks, when I hated the man that I was, when I saw who I really was in the mirror of my soul, I cursed God because that's what we do. I blamed him. He did this to me. I cursed him. And I was authentic for the very first time in a long time. And I said, and when you say that kind of stuff, people are like, oh, they're going to suck you off the stage. But I said it this way. You know what God did? He embraced me deeply. He reached down further. He loved me just the same. Because according to the scripture, the love of Christ was sufficient. Jesus said it is finished. So Paul says there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. So if that's true, why then would I condemn myself? God is not moved by my anger or hatred. He's not moved. And so if he loves me that way, when I curse to his face, can I not love others? Christ died for that very cursing. He took it on himself.
Yeah,
And
literally. I mean, depending on how deep you want to get into the metaphysics of it, he literally saw you doing it as he was dying.
yeah, there you go. I mean, all of it. I mean, he's omniscient. It's incredible. And I talked about the mindfulness a couple of weeks ago of Christ, that he embodied, his humanity. He separated it from his divinity. And when he was on the cross, he embodied the fullness of the suffering emotionally, psychologically, physically, and spiritually, knowing that he was subject to the wrath of God. And then also understanding that his mission was to feel it, to understand it. He refused the strong drink so that he would not be weak in his mind and body. He did not take the alcohol, the numbing agent, because he wanted to receive all of the fullness of that experience. So that when Paul says in Hebrews 4 that we don't have a high priest who can't sympathize, but in every way has been tempted in every way as all men, yet he sinned not. Because he didn't give up. He didn't get angry. He didn't get bitter. He didn't blame us. He didn't blame the Father. He said, Father, take this cup from me, but not my will, but yours be done. And I mean, this is the beautiful thing about, the program that we're working on and the expansion that we're doing with all of these things is that the scripture lays over it perfectly.
Oh, well, that's a when something is true, it's true.
Right. And if it's contradicting, something's not right, you know.
Right.
Goodness. So when it comes to helping guys out, I don't know how many guys you talk to on a weekly basis, but I'm sure it's a lot. And we look at. I'm bringing the nice guy back up again because you've said several times about growing. There's a line that we have a lot of times going around that says, "If something's not growing, it's dead." you know, and what does it look like to grow for a guy who, maybe he's not stupid enough to say, I know that everything's not perfect, but it's pretty good. How can I grow? I think that might be the answer to the question. How can we head off some of this stuff? I think we can teach men to grow. In what areas do they need to grow? In what areas do they need to be mindful and aware? What would you say?
Well, it's best, I think, to start that by disavowing some of the notions that society and the rest of the world are going to tell them will be adequate metrics of their growth,
Mm,
and that's in looking externally. Okay, and a lot of guys will look at, well, I'm growing because I don't know, my wife is responding better to me, so that's indicative of my growth. I know we've got some guys in the program that are still looking to that
right.
as their metric for success.
Yeah.
And it's not that you don't want that,
Right.
but it's not how you measure your growth. Or my bank account is bigger, or something else, something external to me. Me compared to my neighbor has improved.
Yeah.
I've improved in comparison to my neighbor.
Right.
And the fact of the matter is, you start looking internally, and number one, you have to know who you are. You have to know what your values are. You have to know what you're standing on and what you want to move toward. And then you compare your performance today against yesterday,
Yeah.
and you just make it a little bit better every single day, and you hold yourself accountable to your standard for yourself.
Yeah.
And there's a tremendous amount of self confidence that comes from that. I know another one of the online coaches, Bedros Koulian, talks about all the time. You define self confidence is built by keeping the promises you make to yourself.
Hmm. That's
Because
good.
if you can't trust yourself to follow through, why should anyone else?
Yeah.
And you're certainly going to feel like you're going to feel that when you're in a conversation with someone you're trying to help or you're trying to influence. You're going to know you're full of it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That's right. Yeah, a good friend said to me years ago when I was in a fairly hard place. I'd lost a loved one. Just, you would go through those seasons and I was just having a hard time. And he looks at me and then I began to get bitter about some people around me, a little bit toward my wife, a little bit toward my kids. And he walks up to me in my kitchen and we're looking out the window, living in Hayward, California at the time. He says, "You all right, man?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm all right." He says, "Well, here's something I just want to say to you." He goes, how can you expect people to live with you if you can't even live with yourself? How can you expect to do something for them and to be there for them when you can't even take care of yourself? And it was like a wake-up call. I'm like, wow, you're right. Because I was wallowing in my pain. I was wallowing in my physical ailments. And then what the crazy thing is I did it again years ago. I mean, I did it again years later. But when you get sick and things, I mean, I think that there's an opportunity for people to realize that, they've got to have values and they've got to have belief systems. And Pete, I don't know about you, but I was taught a set of values and I was taught a set of belief systems that weren't necessarily ones that I wanted to hold, but I didn't know it. I mean, I didn't know it.
This is something I know. I don't know that it's unique in the group, but I was born and raised, baptized, schooled Roman Catholic. Now, for anybody who grew up Roman Catholic, you can be assured that the one way the next thing that comes out of someone's mouth is not Catholic, they will say, "I went to Catholic school." Because that means they know absolutely nothing about what the church actually teaches, believes, understands, how it actually constructs its belief system and what it's based on, how it traces itself back. I thought I understood them. I went through grammar school, high school, all that stuff. I didn't learn a thing until I was like 35 years old, tripping back into it through a study of history and economics of all things.
Yeah.
And that piqued my interest in a thread of church history. And all of a sudden, I started pouring through things. I'm like, oh, wait a minute. They actually have a point on some of this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm like, that point is deep. And it goes back, roughly 2,000 years.
Right.
It's like all of a sudden, it's like peeling back layers. It's like, what it's like? It's like finding a chest with everything your family valued hidden in the attic somewhere. And like somebody took in the 1960s, threw all this stuff in the chest and hid it away because it upset some people and they didn't know quite how to sell it to the current generation, so they just hid it away up there.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting that you say that. You have to know what you believe and why you believe it, because that's how I felt going through about 2018, 2019. That's when I was really learning a lot of that stuff. That's when I developed meditative practices like a daily rosary, things like that. And it was from a very different perspective than the superficial understanding that I had before.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's funny in the Protestant world, we have always held true to our name to protest everything. So everybody I knew everything that was wrong and everything that I shouldn't know and everything that I shouldn't do and everything that I shouldn't be. But I knew very little about what I should be. And then what I was taught, thank God I had good mentors and the women in my life that raised me spiritually. It was, thankfully for that, I had some sense of identity that was outside this world and outside of my own production. But it was very hard to come to terms to the fact that I still was a product of say this, think this, do this, dress this way, live this way, act this way. This is the way everything should be. And as a student of the Bible and now, a professor of the Bible and an academic in biblical interpretation and epistemology and all of that fancy stuff, the pursuit of that was to clarify what I had learned in the context of my own personal growth and journey, to make sure I was okay, and then realizing I didn't need all this education to begin with, because if we just pay attention and we just grow a little by little, we would learn these things. But I found that a lot of Christianity, and I put quotes in the air if anybody's ever listening to this, a lot of quote Christianity is so far from the core values of Christ and the New Testament teaching that it's not Christianity. And I'm specifically talking about compassion and empathy and and mindfulness and being present and being humble and being quiet and being wrong and being vulnerable and being honest about what we with the speak the truth in love verse that Paul talks about in Ephesians. I mean, that became almost a trope of being, honestly, an asshole. I'm just going to tell you,
Right. Yes.
you know, and oh, pastor said a bad word, but it's just one of those things that's sort of where we are, and we've come to a place in society. You mentioned it. Society has favored controlling people rather than giving them comfort, and they've come to the place.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you're right, because society's in a place where it favors controlling. And I think by and large there's comfort in certainty, and it's easy to confuse certainty with control.
Right,
And at the same time, you've got, the counter reaction to that in society is that no one can control anything no matter what. Everything must be allowed and tolerated, for lack of a better word.
right,
Even though I think that's probably a bad word to be using
yeah,
so flagrantly, because the
right,
implication of the word tolerated is that which should not be tolerated, or though what is it? Tolerant has to do with tolerating something that probably shouldn't be tolerated.
right. Well,
There's a reason why, right? I mean, it's a complicated
yeah.
concept to break that one down.
Where
Uh,
you can't even use the term. I like to use the term. I like to use the idea of we all need to understand one another, because that's what empathy does. That's the second side of the coin of empathy. Not all of us are going to feel each other. I feel everybody wrongly most of the time, but we can all learn to understand each other. And then not only can we learn it, we can enjoy it. We can enjoy the prospect of our humanity has an intersectionality. There's not an Eastern mystical religion. There's not a philosophy. There's not a cult. And I say that very, very openly. There's very few things that I've studied in life that doesn't have an intersectionality with my faith and my core beliefs. But there's a lot of those things that go right against them. But I like to find a way to connect with people that if I can be an influence in their life for the better, why not?
and it's interesting that when you bring up the intersectionality, it reminds me of something that I tripped over the last several years of going through the Catholic side of things in particular. You familiar with Bishop Fulton Sheen?
I've a little bit.
He was one of the he was one of the first televangelists going back to the 1960s. I think it was 60s, maybe into the 70s. He used to he had a chalkboard at the time where he would talk about the wheel of truth,
Okay. Yes.
and he would divide every possible concept into every moral idea, every and talk about how everything has some of this.
Yeah.
Anything that is remotely contingent on natural law and the way the world works
Right.
is going to have some of this.
Right.
So of course there's somewhere you can find some common ground with people.
Yeah.
Some have more, some have less.
Yeah. That's right. But if you look at the New Testament in the book of Acts, a lot of people, and I can't say a lot of people, some people, many people, can't handle what you and I just said because it violates their core values and beliefs. And that's okay. But the core value and the belief that God has called us, according to the Bible, to be compassionate, to be long suffering, to be patient, and to let Him do His work in other people's lives means that if something you say or believe confronts something that I say or believe in a way that would make one of us have to be wrong or both of us wrong, um, the other things that I value, like empathy and love, have to win out. I don't erase all my values because there's a confrontation of some of those values. Or if I do, I have no value at all. And I'm just an egotistical narcissist or a sociopath at worst. But if I was, I probably wouldn't get upset about it.
We could get uglier with it if you want. If you want to start digging into the principle, this could get really, really, really heated here in a second. At least, but there's an individual who rejected God's will from his origin.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You said it. I didn't. No, I've said it before. I've said it before. I've said it before. Yeah. But yeah, and then that's the whole, the whole nut and bolts of everything is that we get into a place where the book of Acts, Paul used exactly what we're talking about. He goes to Athens, he goes to the Athenians, he goes to the Areopagus, and he sees the wisdom of these men, and he sees all these gods. I see modern day, I'll say pseudo Christ like evangelism and apologetics would go, you bunch of heathens, and look at these false gods, burn them down, let's crush them with bats. They're idols. They don't mean anything. Paul said, man, you guys are some of the most brilliant people I've ever seen. So much so that you're smart enough to know that you don't know. Here is your noob. Here's the one to the unknown God. Said, let me tell you about this guy. It goes back to what I knew that I shouldn't agree with rather than what I should agree with. And we have it all there. But it's just another illustration of how, as men, we're told we're the kings and that we're in charge and that everybody should bow down to us and do what we're told because that's what God says. But God's word doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. And even men who aren't that way, we live under the structure of a society, whether you're a Christian or not, or a cult or not, or a mystic or not, or a philosopher or whatever you are, we live under the structure of that type of mindset to some degree. And it's hard. It is really hard when the scales come off your eyes and you see it. Because a guy like me, the pendulum swings way up, gets stuck in the ceiling, and I'm full throttle to fix it all. But I realized, Pete, that as I was trying to fix my own perception of things, that I was actually trying to fix other people's perception of me on those things. And
that actually gives me something to clarify that. I wasn't calling anyone who interprets it that way Satan.
Right.
What I'm saying is they're allowing pride. And I realize it carries a different connotation in June, but they're allowing pride,
yes,
to rule their perception of the world, their own pride.
That's right.
Which is the gateway to every other one of the sins.
No, it is. I mean, what's the Proverbs say? Pride comes before the fall. I mean, when I was restoring this I live in a century home. It's 128 years old, and I spent 10 months restoring it. And the back door, I hung that door. And if you've ever hung a door before, they never close. And I tried 2 or 3 times, and I got it. And I swung that heavy oak door, and it closed, and it clicked, and I went, ah. And I stepped back 4 steps to get a good look and fell through the HVAC vent.
Oh, shit.
Great.
Oh, that's perfect. That is perfect.
Crying out in agony, all alone in this old house, going, "Oh my goodness, this is terrible." That proverb was ringing in my ear. Pride comes, because I was so proud of that door, and it was just a visual experience and a sensational experience to remind me of that. But yeah, it does, and I think that's where we see a lot of in relationships, I see guys that love their wives, and they talk to me and they say, but I'm sick and tired of her X. I'm sick and tired of when she X. I'm sick and tired of making me feel X. And it just shows that they haven't been awakened. They haven't been enlightened.
They haven't been humbled.
They haven't been humbled.
They haven't been humbled, which is to a point you said earlier, where guys seem to have to hit almost like rock bottom before they can start to grow.
Yeah.
Because pride will get in the way, even if there's only a kernel of it left.
Yeah. That's right. It will. It really will. Well, Pete,
you have to be able to approach the world with humility if you're going to have a chance to grow.
That's right. Well, we're coming to the hour mark, but is there anything else that you want to touch on while we're still here? Or?
Anything we haven't touched on?
Talk about the call that you do. I know you do a call, a reflection call, or a reality.
Well, on reality check. Yeah, guys call me to get yelled at on Saturday mornings.
Yeah.
So, well, it's a good call for guys. I come back to how it was my first few weeks in the program when it was like me, Ryan, Cass, and like two other guys. Corey was still active at that point, and we would have like three calls a week. Cass would ask us questions about how things were going,
Mhm.
and you know his delivery.
No.
He's direct. He cuts right through it. He doesn't give you leeway to hide from what's real.
Right.
And that worked very well for me. And to whatever extent I can bring that to more guys, the happier I am.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I laugh sometimes and compare it somewhat to that first 15 minutes of Full Metal Jacket when everybody's getting dressed down by Arlie Ermy.
Right.
But it's a necessary step to the development they're going to go through. Obviously, that movie takes things in really dark places, and
Yeah.
it often can happen that way. But there's an essential step where you need to be broken of these patterns. This programming's not gonna undo itself.
Yeah.
And like I just said, if pride's allowed to even have a little glimmer of control, these guys aren't going to come out of it.
Yeah.
They're going to find a reason. So it's and too many guys sit in their own pain.
That look like.
So whatever I can do to rattle them the way they need to be rattled, just rattle their cage a little bit,
Yeah.
just with the right, compassionately. I don't do it to be mean. I mean, I hope that comes through. I'm not always clear sometimes on whether or not it's coming through that way. And occasionally with certain guys, if I've dealt with them too many times, I will drop that pretense completely. And usually that's with a voice note.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I know, I'm not sure if you've heard any of those when I'll drop those,
No.
but,
You have me one, so
oh man. Yeah, there's been some interesting cases over the years.
yeah.
But it's all coming from a place of wanting to try and help these guys get to where I was fortunate enough to have gotten myself on the night I was handed divorce papers.
Wow.
You know, I mean, because you've got to be free of those if you're going to, if your wife, after you've been in the program for over almost a year, and she has spent the entire time actively ignoring everything you're doing, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
Rejecting dates, rejecting time, rejecting trying to have fun with the family, and you
Yep.
name it. Or even if she's there not being engaged, like to the point where when she hands you divorce papers and you look her in the eye and say, or she says, I you just kind of wait for a question. How many guys immediately would start screaming back, trying to convince her not to,
Right.
begging, whatever it would happen to be, right? Um, I just read through everything and waited for a question. And she asked, do you have any thoughts? I said, well, we live in Illinois. It's not like, I mean, this is your decision. There's nothing I can do to get in the way. It's Illinois. If you want to do this, it can be done. In just that tone that I just said it to you.
Yeah.
And she said, well, I was just expecting more. I said, well, more what? She said, more emotion, anger or something. I said, well, this is where it kind of struck me how little she had been engaged in the year that preceded it.
Right.
I said, this is who I am. And if we're going to talk about emotions, the primary one I'm feeling right now is love.
Yeah.
Love for the kids because they're really going to need it.
Yeah.
Love for you because you think this is what's right for the family.
Right. And that's an unshakable, a beautiful and unshakable foundation. That's good stuff.
And it's a place that I want to see every man get to
Right.
because you can handle anything in your relationship if you can get there.
That's right. And you weren't doing everything to change her. You were
Oh, that was the switch that flipped so quickly. I mean, that was that flick in the forehead Cass was giving me. Sorry, and I know you. We could
oh,
probably go for hours on
going. Keep going.
it. No, I mean that was the flick in the forehead. That was that switch flipping
Mm-hmm.
when Cass was hammering the stuff from a perspective that I needed to hear it, that no one had ever given it to me before.
Yeah.
The information wasn't necessarily new,
Yeah.
but the delivery was just right.
That's right. Yeah. It's tough. A lot of people that, you know, that even I've counseled through the years, and even in the last 2 years, and even in the last 4 or 5 months, I mean, they constantly say, well, I'm doing all I can, and my marriage isn't getting better. And that's why the marriage isn't getting better, because that's still, we'll go back to that. That's still a covert contract. You're trying to change you so that you will get what you want uh, in the relationship, which is to keep it. That's still being a controlling person.
Yes,
Because,
you're changing you to change her,
right, right. And some,
not changing you so you're worth following.
that's right. And some spouses, some wives are not going, they've had it, they're done. And even when they see the man before them that they love and that they would want to be together, the damage is so deep that unless they do the personal work, unless they come through a spiritual enlightenment, unless they go through these things, it's not going to change.
And
And
that perspective, the way you worded that, if we could possibly clip that and throw it in the program,
sure,
because that really captures a lot of the essence of what it means when Cass says you can't control her.
right,
That presupposes you've done all your work you could possibly do on you,
yeah,
and now there's her side of things. Maybe she will, maybe she won't. That's up to her.
right,
But you let that outcome become your why not or why as you do your own work.
that's right, that's right. Well, I'll tell you, brother, it's wild, because when and I'll talk about the program on another time, but and as I have more people on, and because I know people are already asking, what are you talking about? Well, you'll see. Just you'll see. There's so much, but I mean, for years and years and years, I've worked with men, and I've never had really anyone work with me. And so for 2 years, almost 2 years, I had to go out and find it. And I've read almost 90 books in 2 years. I've read many of them, like G.S. Youngblood and Glover and Emily Nagoski and Sue Johnson. I've talked to some of these people on the phone. I mean, I was like, please, I just need to talk. I've gone through 3 therapists, a psychiatrist, and a sexologist, a sex therapist. Everything, to try to figure it all out. And it took about 6 months of all of that, filtering through these things, for me to have that moment of going, what am I doing? I'm pursuing, like a psycho stalker, something for me to be that'll get the attention of my family, not just my wife, but my children. I want everybody to love me. I want the world around me to see me. And when it just sort of hit me like that, that's when the aha moment at the bottom of the barrel. It wasn't a wow, that's amazing. No, it was, I'm about to have a heart attack. I had a panic attack June. I had a panic attack on March the 4th at 11 p.m. of 2023. And it was and I've been having little ones like 2 or 3 weeks prior. And it was so bad, I thought I was going to die. I didn't know what to do. And I had been so overbearing with my wife emotionally for the year before that. She didn't know what to do. She says, what do you want me to do? And I says, I don't know. And I'd come through a series of 16 weeks of an infection, passing out from pain, all sorts of stuff. When I had my surgical intervention for testing life-changing disease, the doctor said, James, I don't know what you got going on in your life, but you need to get your anxiety under control, because the only thing that's wrong with you is you're killing yourself because you're stressed out. And it was then it's like, oh, I get it. I get it. I see it. And it wasn't glorious. The skies didn't open up and angels didn't sing, and there weren't birds flying around with popcorn strings, and there wasn't a fairy godmother there. It was like everything was on fire. But at the first time in my life, I saw that programming. I saw the structure, the frame, and the framework that my life was built on. And I hate that guy. And I'm glad he's gone. you know, I'm,
Yeah, I mean, well, it's so freeing.
it is
It
liberty.
really it's hard. It's hard. Yeah, it's liberty. I mean, and you can't really adequately describe it to somebody who hasn't encountered it yet.
Itchy
You can
nose.
try. You can use
Yeah,
the best. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's can't complain. I mean, when I say it's the best day of my life, I mean it.
I do too. And I've been using that for months. I play competitive billiards and some other things, and I've been using that. And somebody asked me last night again, how? What's happening today? I said, so I gave them three things that had happened yesterday that were really, really bad. You said, what's happened today? This happened and this happened. He goes, why is it the best of your life? I said, because I have full autonomy. And I'm not saying that in a spiritual sense. I'm not saying that God's not in control. It's just emotionally and the confidence and the cognition and where I am no longer operating under these unconscious auspices of society, of religion, of the cultural Christianity. I don't operate there. I don't even think about them. Not only that, I don't even have intrusive thoughts anymore. My thoughts that come into my mind, I put them there. I mean, what some of we do 3 nights a week with some of the guys on some of this kind of stuff where we reflect and learn some anxiety training. But I mean, it's really become the best day of my life because it is the day that I'm alive and it's the only day I have. Today is the only day. If I'm looking to get back to yesterday, that's a fool's errand. If I'm worried about tomorrow, I might as well drink myself to sleep because today is it. So if today is the day that I've been given by God and his grace through the gospel, at the minimum, it's the best day of my life because this is the only day I have. And that's thoroughly biblical. I don't have to go through it all, but I could if someone wanted to.
No, no. Yeah, exactly. And that's what you want to talk about overlapping. I mean, how many people do we have in the program that aren't even remotely religious who experience the same thing?
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Because there's something to be said about, people look at the laws in the Old Testament and they go, oh, we got to follow those laws to be holy. Being set apart, which is what the word holy means, by those laws were not so that they would be spiritually clean and so they wouldn't die physically. Don't do this, eat that, don't eat that, drink this, do this when you get sick, do this. So there wouldn't be contamination. I mean, you can't walk around in wilderness and be subject to constant, centuries of, what do you call that? Centuries of slavery and bondage and just live in the cesspools. So a lot of it's just pure scientific, biological sense that God gave. And the same thing is true with our minds. Same thing is true with our thoughts. Same thing is true with our bodies. So
Yeah, and it's not just about nutrition and survival. You've got Proverbs will give you a finance degree if you read it.
yep, it does. And about being a steward. And, that even when we live in I don't know if you read Cicero, you said you like economics, but, there's some old ancient wisdom there that can be parsed through completely biblical if we did that.
Aristotle.
Yep. Oh yeah. 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 And they miss a lot. But it's okay. There's that, like we talked about, there's that
They
intersection.
don't, yeah, they don't have the whole wheel. They
Yeah.
got chunks of it.
Right. They got chunks of it. Yeah. But here we are. Well, Pete, I've enjoyed this conversation, brother. It's been good, and we'll talk some more. And if there's any specific things like you think, I'd love let's have a conversation about X. I'm happy to get back on and talk more about it. And I appreciate what you do, and appreciate the men that you help. And I know that sometimes, when we do ministry, which is what we're doing, when we minister to people's needs and try to help them, it's up to them. It's up to them to receive it. And it's also for us of people of faith, we know that God will bring the growth in his time. And so ultimately when we go day to day, we don't fret, we just wait and we patiently rest in those promises. So I appreciate your time, brother. And we'll do this again soon.
All right. Thanks for having me, James. I
All right,
appreciate it.
brother.
Thank you.
Bye.